All right, let's get started. Thank you all for joining us this evening for a webinar presentation. My name is Luke Bennett, and I'm the Conservation Coordinator for the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. I'll be helping to moderate the webinar this evening. And before we get started, I'd like to mention that if you would like to ask a question during the presentation, you are more than welcome to do so, either by typing the question into the chat or into the Q&A. Both of those are found at the bottom of your screen. You can type in your question at any point during the webinar, during the presentation. We'll save some time at the end to get to as many questions as we can. And now I'll pass it over to the South Wake Conservationists President Monty Moray to give some updates on the chapter and introduce our speaker for the evening. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Luke. Hi, I'm Monty Moray. I am the president of South Wake Conservationists, and we are part of the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. We're all volunteers, and we cover Raleigh and Point South in Wake County. Public outreach is a key part of our conservation mission, and we're really pleased to host tonight's webinar. I think there's a lot of excitement about this one. It's all about bats. Bats seem to get a lot of excitement, and we're really looking forward to it. Before we get started, though, I'd just like to take a minute to share with you some of the things that are going on with the chapter here in the Raleigh area. So if you're in this area, check some of this out. We've been building up to a big day coming up on Saturday. It's called the Kids in Nature Day event. This is our third year doing it. We haven't quite perfected it yet, but we think we're getting a little better each year. And we have a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of kids connecting them with nature. And that is on May 4th, this Saturday at Lake Benson Park in Garner. So if you're in the area and you haven't registered and you have kids, it's not too late. I encourage you to come. We also will be participating in some other events. There's the Wild About Nature Day event, which is the following Saturday on May 11th, which is at Sug Farm here in Holly Springs. And so we'll be doing an exhibit there. Our theme is about North Carolina mammals. On May 18th, the following weekend, is a grand opening of the Simple Gifts Community Garden, which is in Apex. And that is something that we're really excited about. We've been working with the garden quite a bit in terms of putting out a number of pollinator plants and putting up some purple martin houses and bluebird houses. And so we're going to have some exhibits around wildlife and pollinators at that grand opening. So we're looking forward to that. And then our next meeting is an in-person meeting, which will actually be at Bass Lake Park, as we do quarterly. And that'll be on June 4th, which is a Tuesday in the evening. And it's all about monarch butterflies. And we have our very own Katie Thompson will be leading that presentation. And I think she may even have some of her students. She's a teacher here locally, helping with that presentation about the monarch butterflies. So don't miss that one if you're in the area. So all about bats. That's what tonight is. We're very excited to have such a large showing of people. I know there's a lot of interest. Our guest speaker tonight is Allison Medford. And tonight we will dispel some myths about bats. We'll also learn about the importance of bats in our ecosystems. And we will realize the difficulties facing the bat populations and what we can do to help. Allison is a wildlife diversity biologist with the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission, and she's in the Wildlife Diversity Program, responsible for non-game birds and mammals. She has a bachelor's in zoology, a master's in applied ecology at NC State, and her work includes monitoring the populations of songbirds, barn owls, bald eagles, and small mammals in the Uwharries region and throughout the Piedmont. She is also actively editing the species conservation plans for threatened and endangered species. So she is one busy biologist. We're so pleased to have her here tonight, and I'm pleased to turn it over to Allison to begin the presentation.
Allison, you're still muted.
Did I do it? Am I good now?
Good now.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem.
Let's see if we can get going. All right. Can everybody see that? Be good?
Looks good to me.
All right, great. Yeah, we're going to talk all things bats today, not flying foxes. I wish we could, but those aren't in North Carolina. So we're going to talk about North Carolina bats, North Carolina bat conservation, and the efforts that we put forth at the commission to help our bat buddies. First of all, I always like to talk about what the commission actually is. It's a 19-member commission, which is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, commission, wildlife commission in the country, because we have 19 members. Those are gubernatorially appointed positions, and they establish the policies and regulations governing hunting, fishing, trapping, boating, lands management, non-game management, which is what I do. They're the decision makers. On the 5th floor up there, they have meetings every quarter or so. So if you have questions or concerns or anything like that, I think it's a great idea to know who your commissioners are and get to know them. They're great people and they have a deep love of wildlife. Like was already said, I am a wildlife diversity biologist, which is part of the diversity program, which is part of the wildlife management division. We have folks who do private lands management, public lands management, and then folks like me who do non-game species focused work, whether that be in the field collecting data or what I do a lot of the time, which is edit species conservation plans, which are very important to help figure out and really home in on what our management for threatened and endangered species needs to look like. So we'll start with the real basics. What is a bat? They're not rodents, even though they're small mammals. They're of the order Chiroptera, which is the second largest mammalian order after rodents. They're the only true flying mammals. As I'm sure y'all know, they are primarily nocturnal. Something else that sets them very much apart from rodents is they're not highly prolific. They only have 1 to 2 pups a year, whereas rodents, on the other hand, can have, some species of mice can have like 56 pups in a year. So very, very different there. Something else that sets them apart from rodents is they're very long-lived, with an average of 4 to 8 years, but that really depends on the species. Eastern small-footed bats, for example, can live 6 to 12 years. Big brown bats, they've been on record up to 18 years. There is a Brandt's myotis, which is a species in Russia that was banded and known to live 41 years. So I think that's pretty crazy for such a small critter living that long. I'm going to dispel some pretty common myths. The first, that bats are blind. They're not blind. They can see as well as you and I do. They do, of course, use echolocation, and we'll talk more about that in a second when they're hunting. Another one is that bats make nests. They don't make nests. Another differentiation from rodents. And they'll get tangled in your hair. They don't. They're very agile flyers, though, so they can have the capacity to like fly real close to your head, but they won't get tangled in your hair. Bats want to suck your blood. They don't. All of the bats in North Carolina eat insects, but there are 3 species of vampire bats. They live in Central and South America, but even they don't suck your blood. They have an anticoagulant in their saliva that keeps the blood of their prey, be it a cow or a chicken or something like that, from clotting, so that blood flows through freely and they can lap it up or lick it up, but even they don't suck blood. Another real common myth is that all bats are rabid. That's not true. Only 2 to 6% of the bats that are tested for rabies come back positive, which means about half of 1% of all bats have rabies. But I do recommend an abundance of caution with bats and rabies, because the type of rabies that bats can get is the type of rabies that people can get. And it's hard to tell sometimes if you get bit by a bat. So if you wake up and you find a bat in your room or something like that, I recommend calling a wildlife control agent and your local health department, because that's not really something to mess around with at all. But not all bats flying around are just flying around with rabies. That's very much not the case. And finally, the myth that bats don't matter. They do. They provide a wealth of ecological sources for us in there, and services. So I hope by the end of this presentation, you can see how much bats do matter and the ecological services that they provide, which is robust. All the bats in North Carolina eat insects exclusively. A single bat can eat up, goodness sakes, I'm so sorry, can eat up to half its body weight a night. A pregnant or nursing female bat can eat up to 100% of her body weight in a night. That usually equates to about 6,000 to 8,000 mosquito-sized insects in a night. A large colony of big browns can eat 18 million corn rootworms in a summer, which, talk about useful for a farmer. That's a big ecological service right there. We tend to discuss bats as a monolith, particularly in rule. When we make rules about bats, we thought like just bats. But of course, different species of bats have different life histories, and they eat different things. They specialize in different things. They have different habitats, some of which you can really see in what they specialize in eating. So example, big browns in evening specialize in eating beetles, eastern reds and hoaries, moths and beetles. Little browns eat mainly aquatic insects, which is really helpful for us to know, so that when we're looking at a map and we're trying to determine the best place to look for different populations of different kind of bats. For example, with little browns, we can stick to riparian areas and know that we have a better shot at finding them there. Northern yellow bats eat leafhoppers and flies and beetles. Virginia big-eared bats in the mountains eat mostly moths, and then southeastern bats are the most likely to eat mosquitoes. So they are your real buddies there. Now, all bats will eat a wealth of different types of insects, but these are the ones that those particular species like to specialize with. How do bats eat? This is super cool. We are probably all pretty familiar with echolocation as a concept. It's called that because the sound waves go out, they hit, bounce off whatever prey item the bat is paying attention to, and it is reflected back to the bat, and that helps locate where they are. So a bat will send out feeding clicks, and then as it gets closer to the prey item, it'll start clicking faster to get more specific information about where that bug is. So what direction it's flying, how fast it's flying, all of those things. So it makes them very, very effective hunters. Really, really cool. So apart from insect control, bats also provide an opportunity for really closely viewing wildlife. If anybody's had you out in your yard in the evenings and you see the bats flying around, that's so cool. When I was a little kid, we would take a big marshmallow and throw the marshmallow up in the air, and the bats would pay attention to it as if it was a bug, and they'd fly all the way down to the ground. And we got to see really good, quick but close-up views of bats, and I've always found them so fascinating. They're also mutually beneficial for some game species. So bats are an indicator of habitat health, of ecosystem health. So if you have pretty robust bat populations, that means you've got pretty robust and healthy insect populations, which means you likely have a good balance of native plants, which is good for small mammals. It's good for other herbivorous animals like deer, for example. But the bugs are also good for turkeys. So when you have, and then that cascades up, of course, doesn't it? So it's good for the mesopredators, it's good for the main predators and the raptor populations and all these sorts of things. So when we see good, strong, healthy bat populations, is an indicator that the habitat in general and the ecosystem in general is well balanced. So bats are a really good ecosystem indicator species, or suite of species. There are 17 species of bats in North Carolina, 4 of whom are either out and out federally endangered or proposed or under review. That's the Virginia big-eared bat, the gray bat, Indiana bat, tricolor bat, and then little brown bats under review. One that's federally threatened, that's a northern long-eared bat. One that's state threatened, which is the mountain population of the Raffin-esque big-eared bat. And then 3 that are state special concern, the southeast bat, the northern yellow bat, and the eastern small-footed bat. There are bats all over the state, but there's not the same bats all over the state. There are certain species that are found statewide, like the eastern red bat, for example, or the big brown bat, which is little. There's a little brown bat and a big brown bat. Both of them are small, but they're very common as far as bats go. But then there's neat species that just live in the mountains, like the eastern small-footed bat, like the gray bat, Virginia big-eared bat. And then there's some that are just on the coast, like the northern yellow bat and the southeastern bat. It's so cool to travel around and find different species, different places. But in the Piedmont, where I live in Montgomery County, we've got what I'll sweetly term the boring bats. We don't have the really cool myotis or anything like that. But I love an eastern red bat. I think they're cool. They're the ones, the big picture with the fluffy tops. That's the eastern red bat. You're most likely to encounter big brown bats and Brazilian or Mexican free-tail bats in buildings. So if you've ever had the misfortune, I don't know, of having bats in your house, you most likely had big brown bats or Mexican free-tail bats. And then I think the one that you're most likely to encounter, not in a building, but if you're just like out in your yard watching bats fly around, it's the eastern red bat. They're very common, super cool guys. This is the big brown bat is on the left, the Mexican free-tail bat or Brazilian free-tail bat is in the middle, and the eastern red bat is on the right-hand side there. Free-tail bats are real easy to tell because they have a very long tail, and they are one of the only bat species whose population is increasing. They're really, really interesting bats. So how do bats get into buildings? These are calls that I get a lot. People have bats in their houses. They want to know how it happened and what they can do about it. So bats can get into anywhere that's a joint of some kind, in gable, attic, vents, gaps, anything like that. They can get in anywhere that's a 1/4 inch by a 1/4 inch. They can get into very, very small spaces. And they're getting in your attic or wherever it is because it's warm and it's dry and they feel safe there, and that's fine. Now, the way to get them out is something called an eviction and exclusion, which is where usually a wildlife control agent that you would hire will come out and install eviction or exclusion devices, which think of a PVC pipe with like a bread bag or something on the end of it, a smooth plastic tube with a soft plastic end. So think one-way valve. Bats can fly out, but they can't fly back in. So those are placed and they're left out for a week or 2 weeks because not all bats will fly out in the same night. So they fly out and then they can't fly back in, and then that professional will come and seal any of the entrances that the bats are using to get into the house or building or whatever it is. This time of year, though, is called the blackout period. This is May 1st to July 31st, and that is no evictions, no exclusions, no questions about it. And that's because this is the maternity season for bats. So female bats get together in maternity colonies and they have their pups, and pups can't fly for that whole space of time. So the mama bats will leave and they'll hunt and they'll forage at night, and then they'll come back and feed their pups. But if an eviction is being performed or an exclusion, then the mama bats fly out, but they can't fly back in. So other than the obvious detriment of you got a bunch of baby bats in your attic and now mamas can't get them, mamas can't feed them, and those baby bats would typically perish. Also, those mama bats would try really hard to get back to their babies, so that they would get into the living space more than they otherwise would if they had free access to that attic space or wherever they are. So because bats are really difficult to tell apart just by looking and not actually holding the bat in your hand, and even that takes quite a bit of training, bats are difficult to identify. So in this case, we do treat bats as a monolith and say, doesn't matter no evictions, no exclusions, because you might have the take of a listed species. But also just nobody wants to kill a bunch of baby bats. So that's why we have the blackout period. If you or anybody that you know is experiencing bats in your house, in your attic, all of that, now if there's a bat in the living space, that needs to get taken out immediately, no matter what time of year. And then the eviction and exclusion can be done later on, but the bat in the living space needs to be removed. But if anybody's dealing with that or knows somebody that's dealing with that, have them call me. You can call me, talk to me about it. And then, you know, you can get a WCA hired to take care of that work for you. If you do have this happen and you have to do an eviction or exclusion, or if you just want to try and have a bat colony that's living close to you so that you can benefit from their eating all the insects and all that kind of cool stuff that they do, you can install an artificial roost, which is also known as bat house. There's a few different flavors of bat houses, but in general, my recommendations are that we should get more chambers, the better. We're going to have my 2-year-old join me. More chambers, the better. It needs to be at least 24 inches tall, 2 feet tall. And that's so that it's big enough that the bats can go up and down and regulate their temperature during the day. 1-inch crevices with rough surfaces so they can skitter up and down in it. At least 7 hours of sunlight, the more is fine. They like to be warm. At least 12 feet high, trying to get it closer to 20 feet, which can be a challenge to get a pole that big, but they like to be high up. I don't recommend mounting it on a tree, which might seem a little odd because bats naturally can, depending on the species, can hang out in trees. But there's a big difference between a couple bats under some bark and a whole bat house feast of bats, right? So because of predators, I don't recommend mounting it on trees. And then put it in a place where it won't be disturbed, ideally. You know, someplace where you're not going to mow every week. Of course, they can be in places that get disturbed all the time. But if we're doing ideals to where to place it, that's my recommendation. Also, placing it near water is an ideal situation as well. Here are 2 different popular designs. The top one's called a rocket box, and the bottom one is a maternity box. You'll notice that black box is mounted on a house. You can do that. You can mount it on a house, and some people find great success having their bat boxes mounted on a house. But if you have bats take up residence in that bat box, there's going to be a lot of mess underneath it that you're going to have to clean up. So that's not my strongest recommendation. Sometimes that's all the options that people have, and you know, you do what you can. But we got rocket boxes and maternity boxes. You can find them online, but just be sure that they're big enough, tall enough, because some of the ones that you can find online are just little, like 1 foot, 5 foot, and that's not ideal. So all of this boils down to, why do we care? Why do we care about these little flying guys? They're, other than the fact that they're neat. Particularly, we want to pay attention to bats because of white nose syndrome, which is a fungal disease. It's a fungal disease caused by the fungus Pseudogymnoascus destructans. And it causes and has caused mass mortalities across North America since it was first found in the winter of 2006, 2007. Over 7 million bats have died because of it, with the mortality rate in many hibernacula, which is just a fancy word for where bats hibernate, between 90 and 100%. Just mass mortality, staggering. It is a fungal infection. So think about human fungal infections like athlete's foot or something that would, they irritate, right? So we're not thinking so much about a bacterial or a viral infection that would kill the bats outright. This fungal infection irritates them awake when they should be hibernating. And then they have no fat reserves left. If it's really cold where these bats are, then they can't find food and they can't find water, and they die of starvation or dehydration. Now, a full-blown white nose infection can cause real problems with their circulatory systems and temperature regulations and respiratory function. So they can have really bad physiological effects from having this disease. But the main cause of death is starvation and dehydration in white nose syndrome. Some signs that we notice with white nose, obviously, is a white fungus on the nose and wing membrane and ears or tail, and that's why it's called white nose. But also behavioral characteristics like bats flying or foraging during cold days in the winter. Typically, bats aren't active at temperatures less than 55 degrees. So if it's real cold and bats are flying around, that usually tells us that something's wrong. Also, if we notice bats clustered near hibernacula entrances, that's sort of a red flag, because typically a bat would fly all the way to the back or nearer to the back of the hibernacula because they're going to be there for a while. So if they're at the entrance, that tells us something. And then, of course, dead or dying bats near hibernacula would be a giveaway as well. The commission monitors bats using 4 different methods, and they're all different times a year. We have hibernacula surveys, mist netting surveys, roost surveys, and then the NA Bat Project, which I'm very excited to talk to you about. Hibernacula surveys are our main white nose surveillance system. When we go in the winter, we go into the caves and mines and we count all bats, and we swab the bat. We swab the bats and swab the substrate that they're on and have that tested for the presence of PD. We also can see population trends, whether they're increasing, decreasing, or if they're stable, because we tend to go to the same hibernacula every year or frequently. Then in this, different slide, you can see when white nose was first found in North Carolina, which is in 2011, we saw a drastic decrease in bat population, the number of hibernating bats, a 98% decrease in mountain hibernacula counts. Since 2015, the numbers have been pretty consistent, but really low. We're now starting to see the numbers slowly begin increasing again, but it was some really pretty depressing numbers for a really long time. Then the summer work that we do is mist netting surveys, and that's when we put up these really light gauzy nets, and we open them at sunset. Then they're open until about 1 in the morning. We catch bats, they fly into those nets, we take them out, take measurements, see if we can determine their reproductive capacity at that time, and then we banned some species, and that shows us population trends as well. We have some places that we mist net every single year or every other year, and then new places that we try every year. Like our counts for the hibernacula surveys, mist netting surveys, we have been, pretty depressing too for the last many years. These are the percent changes of the mountain mist netting, and I'm referencing the mountains because we have the longest data set there. We were doing a lot of this work even before white nose was found, so pretty depressing. But again, we're seeing those numbers kind of stabilize and start to increase. Then roost surveys, this is where we count all the bats in a known roost, again, to show us population trends. If we can count the same roost multiple years in a row, that gives us a good indication of what the population is doing. But this is also a cool citizen science opportunity. If you know of a bat roost and you can go out in an evening and do what's called an emergence count, you can wait for the evening where when all the bats would leave, and you can kind of get an idea of how many there are. And that's a roost survey. And then the NA Bat Project, which I love. I love this project. I think it's so cool. This is certainly engaging citizen scientists. It shows us population trends. We run the same routes every year. It's a 10-mile route that you drive 20 miles an hour. You've got this cool microphone on the top of your car, and it's plugged into a tablet, and it shows you real time what bats are being recorded. This is audio recording, so we're listening to bats instead of looking at them, but it records the audio of bats, and then we can go back after the season and look and see what all we got recordings of, and that's really cool. Something that I find very interesting is how we're able to identify bats based on their sound, because it's different from birds. I'm sure all of y'all are familiar with species identification based on a bird's song, but they're intending to carry species information with them in their song. They mean for other birds to know what they are, and if they're looking for a mate or whatever they're doing. Bats aren't trying to convey any species information with the sounds that we're recording and identifying them using. These are their foraging clicks that we were talking about earlier. And some of them we can't tell apart species, but some of them we can. And I think it's really, really neat that we've learned to do that sort of thing. And it's just a super exciting project. If anybody would like to get associated with NA Bat, I really recommend you giving me a call or an email. The season is going to start really soon, and we're hoping to add some new routes for next year. So that'd be a great opportunity. It goes from your time commitment would be you have to run the route twice, and it starts 45 minutes after sunset. So you're driving around real slow at night, but it's really fun. It's a really fun project. I think it's great. A couple of years ago, our main bat biologist in the mountains, Catherine Etchison, was featured in a really neat documentary about bats, and it's called In Echo All About. And I recommend, it's not very long, it's like 40 something minutes. I really recommend anybody who's interested checking out the Vimeo for that. So just Google In Echo All About Vimeo, and you'll find it. And it's cool, and you'll see more in depth the kind of work that's being done in North Carolina. It's really cool. Goodness. So what can you do? What can you do as just a regular person who's interested in bats and thinks bats are neat and not creepy? Because by this time, none of y'all think bats are creepy anymore. You can encourage insects. That's the number one thing, because that's their food source. So encourage insects, plant natives. I'll always recommend plant natives, plant native plants, plant native trees, have native landscaping, avoid using pesticides, plant host or moth host plants. And that could be anything from even cabbages in your garden if you want to sacrifice a few to have cabbage whites. But plant moth host plants that will make more moths for the bats to eat. If you have oak trees, encourage those oak trees. Not only are they an important tree for bats to hang out in, but they also have oak caterpillars and then those moths that bats like a lot. And then light colored flowers that insects are attracted to. Just make your landscaping as insect friendly as you can. If it's feasible, if it's safe, consider leaving some snags standing. Again, if they don't pose a safety or property risk. I don't want anybody making unwise decisions in the name of bat conservation. But if you can, if it's safe to leave a snag, do it, because that's a great bat roost. And then you can do roost checks and you can do roost counts and all those kind of things. But lots of different species of bats use snags to roost in. So I encourage you to leave those if you can. Again, I'll caveat the safety thing, but that's helpful. Keep your cats inside. We know that they kill songbirds, but they also kill bats. And not only does that obviously hurt the bats, but it is a potential rabies exposure for your cat. So nobody wants that. Just keep your cats inside and that'll be good. And finally, you can enjoy the bats. Bats are an important part of our ecosystem. I hope that you see it. Encourage the bats in your landscape and enjoy seeing them. Enjoy it. They're so cool. This time of year, you're going to start seeing them flying around in the evenings a lot. And they're just watch them fly. Watch them, how fast they can move, and that they're hunting insects every time they turn. And that's just enjoy how neat they are. And and then engage in bat conservation efforts. There's lots for you to do. There's lots for you to get involved in. And even if you just want to chat bats, you can always shoot me an email, call me, text me, and I'm happy to talk more about bats with anybody. I love them. I think they're so cool. So if anybody's got questions, I don't know if we have, but if we do, now's the time.
Thank you, Allison.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember it was last summer. I was sitting on my back porch and there were a bunch of bats flying above me. It really is mesmerizing just to sit back and watch them for a long period of time. And I remember like when I was watching them, because I do a lot of bird watching, and I mean you could see with binoculars, you can see them up close, especially if it's during the day. How do you identify bats? I feel like that's really difficult to do, especially at night, right?
It is. So are you talking about like in a mist net, or like when I've got them in my hand, or just flying around?
Is it possible as they're flying around to identify them by like flight pattern and things like that?
Not flight pattern so much, but some of them you can see close enough that like you can see their fur color, or you can see some characteristics about them, like how long their tail is, or if they've got a fluffy head. And then sometimes you can tell basic like different choices between a couple of species by how high they're flying. Some fly real high, so you can narrow it down by that. But I mean, obviously the best way for us to identify them is to get them in our hand and see what they are, which I don't recommend doing. Don't y'all go.
I didn't realize we had, was it 17 species in North Carolina?
Yeah.
And the number of species that were like on the endangered list, the number of species that were threatened, I mean, that was pretty staggering.
It is. And I don't think I mentioned this earlier. White nose doesn't affect all species of bats the same. So for example, eastern red bats, we've swabbed and found PD on them, but we've never seen a bat sick with white nose. And in none of the literature that I don't think they're affected. So there are species that are unaffected by white nose, but typically the bats, the cave dwelling bats that hibernate in big cave systems, those are the ones that get sick from it.
So it's really just that white nose syndrome that's what makes them so susceptible to becoming endangered. Is there any other threats to them?
Wind power is increasingly a threat. They get killed by the turbines, but there's more work being done with that. We're not really sure how far reaching or extensive that potential damage is.
Looks like we have quite a few questions. I don't want to take up all your time, but I had one more quick one.
Yeah.
We get a lot of calls at the Wildlife Federation, and oftentimes we'll ship them off to you guys. But
that's fine.
How do you, I mean, what's your response typically when someone says that they're afraid of bats, or they're afraid that they're gonna suck their blood or something like that? Is there like a go-to?
I usually tell them they're so cute. How can you be afraid of them? And they are. I mean, to be fair, I'm glad they are as small as they are, because some of those teeth they're sharp. And like evening bats, for example, look like tiny wolves. So I'm glad that they are as small as they are. But really, it's a matter of education, I think. And there's nothing to be scared about. They're not malicious. They're not going to come at you. They don't want to run into you or anything like that. But I understand. I mean, it's not one of those critters that we handle very much or see very much. And I think just by virtue of them being nocturnal, that lends to some of the mystery around them. But really, when you find out that they just like to fly around and eat bugs, then they're not so scary.
Then they're A-okay in your book, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so quite a few questions here. I'll start from the top. Again, we probably won't have time to get to all of these, but I'll send out a follow-up email and folks can reach out to you at a later time. So, but be careful, you might get bombarded with questions all at once.
Oh, I love it. It'd be fun.
Okay. So, Rosanna says, I saw lots of bats in a cave. They were hanging. Oh, this is a comment, I guess. She named one Little Evan. It was in Tennessee. So
yeah. And that's one of the places in big cave systems in Tennessee and Kentucky and down into the Ozarks. That's where bats, the migratory species, go in winter. So yeah, awesome.
Do you have a favorite Do you have a favorite place to observe bats?
No, well, increasingly you can't go see them so much anymore. There used to be a whole I mean, they still go like in Mammoth Cave, but you can't get so close to them anymore. And we're real careful about how we deal with being in caves, and a lot of caves are being closed so that people don't inadvertently spread white nose around, because it can get spread on ropes in your boots and all that kind of stuff. So no.
So you don't have any claustrophobia or anything when you're hanging out in a
Well,
cave?
thankfully, in the Piedmont, we primarily just have mine shafts that we go into, and it's not so bad. But there are some that I don't want to hang out on there too long. That's for sure.
Cindy has a really good question here. Is there anything coming, anything in terms of like a new medicine, new technology to treat the white nose fungus?
Yeah, they're trying stuff all the time. There's some work being done with bananas, because it like the antifungal stuff that they put on bananas to see if they can just get the bats through the winter. Because that's it. If a bat can find enough to eat and drink, it's not like what would be another disease we're familiar with? CWD, for example, in deer, that I mean, for all intents and purposes, a death sentence. If a deer gets CWD, it's going to die of CWD. And it's not that for bats. If they can eke out enough in existence during the winter, and they can get enough to eat and drink, then they'll survive it. Which is not typically the case in the New England, in New York, where it was first found. But for example, we've never found white nose on the coastal plain here because it stays warm enough, presumably. And thankfully, we're learning that more and more bats are migrating to the coastal plain during the winter. So that's great. It's keeping those bats safe. But you can kill white nose, the fungus, with boiling water. But of course, you can't go in a cave and spray boiling water around. So there's lots of work being done, but nothing that is able to be put out on a wide scale yet. I mean, there's crazy things like they'll move all the bats from a cave to a man-made, controlled, clean cave and then put them back before they wake up. Like, they've tried that sort of thing. But as far as something that is able to be widely distributed, they haven't found anything yet.
Just holding on.
Yeah. Yeah, but there's always a remnant. And even the species that are really, really hard hit, there's some that just for whatever reason they're not going to get it, and that'll be the mating population, and hopefully the numbers will grow from there. But yeah, it's been really interesting to see the last, or my whole career, watching bats slowly recover. It's good.
Is there I need to get to some of these questions. I don't want to ask my own, but so John is wondering, what is the most common bat around Badin, Baden Lake?
Baden Lake, probably. Yeah, probably eastern red bats. That's one of the most common. Big brown bats are pretty common too, but the ones that we catch most often in the nets are eastern red bats by a good score. Yeah.
I know John Kinsella has a question, and I definitely want to give him a chance to ask. John, you can you're off mute. You can talk if you want to ask your question.
Yeah, what are the primary predators of bats, and do they actually have natural predators?
Yeah, they do. Which is why I don't recommend putting a bat house in a tree. Other than cats, raccoons will eat bats. Snakes can eat bats. Anything that can climb up in a tree and grab a little tasty mouse-sized snack will eat a bat.
John, I saw you had another question in here too.
Yeah. How low do bats, fly? I know you had mentioned they eat beetles. Maybe they eat the beetles on the fly. But I had a situation in my yard a few years ago where I had some cactus. The cactus weren't that big; they were less than a foot. And it was heartbreaking one day because I went out and a bat was impaled. It was still alive, but it was impaled on a cactus. And I thought, how low is this bat flying?
Yeah, they can fly really low. They drink on the wings, so they'll fly all the way down to water. So they could fly all the way down to land. They tend to eat in flight. So I might be a little surprised if it was trying to eat something off of a cactus, but I don't know. I mean, I know that they can fly down to drink, so they could fly all the way down to the ground. Yikes.
Can I just follow with a follow-up question?
Yeah.
You're probably familiar with in Austin, Texas, a few years ago, under this bridge, they had
Mhm.
just unbelievable numbers of bats. Is that still
Yeah.
pretty well active, or has it been affected by any disease?
That's, if I'm remembering the right thing, that's Mexican free-tail bat colony, and they are not affected by white nose. But I know in there's a place in China Grove that I went to not too long ago to check out, and they had 2,000 at least free-tail bats and big brown bats. So Mexican free-tails tend to have really big colonies. Yeah.
So Michael has a question here, and I guess this is relevant, but I believe this is a big cicada year, if I'm not mistaken.
It seems like it.
Yeah. I know Monty was talking earlier that their dogs are eating all the cicadas in the yard. So.
Yeah, it seems like it.
Yeah, the dogs are getting a lot of snacks, but do bats eat cicadas?
I don't know. I don't know why they wouldn't, but I don't
That
know.
would be a pretty nutritious meal.
Yeah, I mean, they'd be
Right.
square for the night, wouldn't they? Those things are huge.
Yeah, it's abundant this time of the year, right?
I imagine that they would if they could, but I don't know that for sure.
It looks like there's a lot of questions about installing the boxes, like where would we find instructions for roosting boxes, and also are there companies that will install hibernaculums? What's that?
Well, they won't install hibernacula because those are the places that they hibernate. But you could get a intrepid handyman to help you put a bat box up. I've had good luck finding a very willing Eagle Scout who needs an Eagle Scout project to make bat boxes. You don't need like a degree in carpentry or anything to make them. They're not too difficult. And there's lots of instructions online. I had some websites listed, like in BatCon is a good one to have that has good instructions. Maybe if we can do a follow-up email, I can give all that and we can email that information to folks if they're interested.
That's a good idea. I'll write a note so we include that. And
okay.
Yeah, forget all these bridges and bike racks. Let's get these Eagle Scouts building some bat houses, some bat boxes.
Yeah. I had a whole bunch of them built that way, and it was
idea.
really cool because they got to learn about bats as they were doing it, and I went and did a presentation with their scout group, and it was good. It was a very worthwhile thing.
So we have time for a few more questions here, if you don't mind. So this one's, well, let me ask this one. So how is your experience with the Wildlife Resources Commission? How has that, I guess, changed the way you see bats and other wildlife when you're walking around outside? How has that changed the way you've seen wildlife, you view wildlife?
I'm very, very blessed that I learned all this on the job. I thought bats were neat before, but I didn't know anything about them until I started this. And I've learned from some excellent bat biologists that I work with, but also in the country. And I've learned all of this. And so now I can ID them. I can, I'll learn everything about them. And I think that's awesome. And that I've gotten to do all this cool field work to learn about them. But it is as true with anything that you learn. Like if you learn a musical instrument, your ear hears more of the intricacies in a melody, for example. So now when I look around and go hiking or whatever, I know those plants, I know those critters, and it's just I think it's a richer experience, but it's also the beautiful thing about it being on the job training is anybody can do that. Anybody can watch a bunch of YouTube videos, read a bunch of books, get their Sibley's guide, there's so much information that anybody can learn all this stuff. It doesn't take any specialized anything. It's just dedication to doing it and surrounding yourself with people who can point you in the right direction. And now that we've got such cool apps like Plant ID apps and eBird and all that kind of stuff, it's easy to learn this stuff, or you don't have much of an excuse not to, I guess. But that's it. Anybody can do it. And I think it's a very fulfilling skill set to have.
Yeah, I was helping to lead a bird walk a few weeks ago, and that was definitely something I realized, like I'm learning with you guys, Like,
Yeah,
I'll answer any questions I can, but I'm on the ride with you guys.
absolutely. Anytime I do any of this stuff, I'm learning a ton.
And I definitely love how to push citizen science. I think that's an exceptional way to get people outside and to get people engaged. And like you said, it really does enrich, your experience when you're just walking outside. And sometimes it can be a little bit, I don't know about distracting, but when you want to identify everything and understand everything,
Yeah.
it opens up a door for sure.
My poor kids, because my husband and I are both professional wildlife biologists. So when we're walking around outside, the kids are like, just walk.
Just walk. Let's just run around.
But
for once.
I think it's fantastic. And I love NABAT. I think it's such a cool project, especially now that the technology has gotten so that if you have two people in the truck with you and like one person sitting in the passenger seat holding the tablet, you see in real time what you're hearing. So it's not even that you're just like recording things into a void. You get to see, and then you think every time you're driving at night, that's really going on around you. The bats are flying around, foraging around you anyway. And it's just a cool, like, oh yeah, that's true. They're there. They're doing it all the time. It's not just this special day.
With all this monitoring stuff that you do, is there anything it could be bats or another wildlife species. Is there anything that surprised you about that? Or like once you see the numbers in front of you?
Just, I don't know. I'm trying to think of all the species. Some of the recordings we get leads me to believe that some of these species are wider spread geographically than we previously thought, which is cool to think about. And then you have to think like, okay, if they're there, if we hear them, why aren't we catching them in a mist net? And part of it is some of them just fly too high. Part of it, we can kind of focus our efforts in really specific areas because of that audio data, that we can say we really need to hone in on this geographical area to see if we can catch some little browns or, something like that, which I think is really, really cool. And then just in general, things we learn about one of the other species I work with is barn owls. And like, it was so interesting to me to find out that they really like to use permanent hunting blinds, for example, as their nesting structures. And just the interplay between hunters and barn owls in that, and that they're providing such an important nesting resource. They don't even mean to, and they might get ill about it sometimes because barn owls can sure make a mess. But just the interplay of all of that, I love learning that kind of stuff and seeing it, and then talking to really interested people like y'all that care about it too. I think that's great.
Yeah, I just learned that my picnic table on my porch is providing habitat for carpenter bees. So
yeah. Well, be careful because last year my back deck was providing some habitat for carpenter bees, and then that was providing a meal for a pileated woodpecker, and she tore my deck all up to get those.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah,
that call will definitely wake you up in the morning.
Yeah, I was like, I think you're so cool, but not on my deck.
But the house is vibrating. I don't know.
Yeah.
We need this.
There like she didn't care. Yeah, wildlife.
I forgot to ask this earlier, but are bats, and you might have said this during the presentation, are bats migratory? Do they move around a lot?
Some are. Some are. Mm-hmm.
Some are. Okay.
Yep. And I'm going to give like a real lame answer that is basically, I don't know, but that's basically because we don't know. Some species are migratory, but also some individuals are big browns, for example, some of them do migrate and some of them don't. Mexican freetail, some of them migrate, some of them don't, and we don't know why that is yet. And it takes a lot of doing to put like GPS tags on bats and watch them move around, but all of that is so cool, so cool. Like, we know we have more gray bats in North Carolina than we thought we did because of those GPS projects.
Yeah, I feel like we're kind of spoiled sometimes because we have just eBird and the Bird Atlas just at our fingertips, and we're like, oh, why can't this be like this for all the other animals?
Yeah. And part of that, birds are so easy to identify. But I mean, I would love to see a push like that. And we do have, it's not nearly on the same scale as the Atlas, but we have dedicated weeks of netting in different parts of the Southeast every year. And we net for a whole week in different places in an area, and it's called a bat blitz. And we do that to get as much information as we can. And our bat team at the commission nets all summer, all throughout the state. So, you know, we find as much as we can, and bats comparatively, compared to the rest of the small mammal data that we have, we're just inundated with data. We're silly with data. We can say so much for certain about bats compared to how little we have with other small mammals. So we're very blessed as a state and as an agency to have the caliber of bat biologists that we have. Not talking about myself, Catherine Etchison particularly, who's our state bat biologist. She does phenomenal work, and it's just inspiring to work with her. I've never met anybody who loves what they do quite like she does, and just a pleasure to work with. All of the bat biologists are, but we know so much about that species because of our long-term survey sites and because of all of the different work that we do. But yeah, it's still not on par with the Bird Atlas, though. So,
One day.
yeah, maybe.
I'm sorry to ask, but when you guys are driving around, do you say that you're driving in the Batmobile or anything like that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Just to make sure.
Of course. Yeah, Catherine's truck is called the Batmobile.
The Batmobile. Perfect. So I guess last question. Well, first, have you gotten to like tag the bats yourself?
Yeah.
What's that like when when you see that the bat has moved? Is that like, I don't know, I feel like that'd be pretty cool to see, like, oh, you just tagged a bat, and then you could like see that it's somewhere else now.
Yeah, so we have two different taggings, and I guess I should be more specific. I have banded bats, so you put a little tag on their arm.
Gotcha.
But we have recaptured some of those, and that's awesome to net a recapture of that. But also we do put the tags on, and the GPS tags, and they go for a few days, and that for those, like the technicians that are following those bats, that's what they're doing those days. They're following those bats around because they're really easy to lose. It's not a very large GPS thing that they can do. So they can even take a Yagi antenna and just drive around and try and find them. So it's a very intensive process. But there's some cool new technology called MODIS. I don't know if y'all are familiar with MODIS. I recommend looking it up. It's cool. It's GPS nano tagging, and they want to do it for birds, and it's being done with birds, but they can do it with bats too, and even tiny stuff like insects. They're putting tags on, which is craziness. But the idea is that it's a geofence. So anytime the bird or the bat or whatever flies through this fence of MODIS equipment, I mean, it's not visible, right? It's just digital, but they fly through this. The people who are collecting that data get it all. So then you can make these really robust movement maps of these critters that have been tagged with MODIS tags. And we're really excited about it at the commission and some of our partner agencies. It's cool work that is being done and increasingly being done. So look for more of that data in the future.
Well, that's really cool. It's always inspiring to see like new technologies that are coming out, and new citizen science initiatives and things like that. I feel like there's a lot of optimism that comes with that when there's something new that we can use that helps us in the end conserve bats and conserve different species. And I guess that
Definitely
leads me into my last question. And I definitely, Monty, do you have a question, or certainly want to give you a chance here?
Yeah, just a quick one. I'm just interested to understand a little more about where this population is going, because I know the graph was pretty drastic.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
decline, and I think you said it's stabilized.
Mhm.
So it's not going down as precipitously as it was, but it's pretty
Right.
darn low. So what?
Yes.
How do we go from stabilized to increasing populations again? I mean, other animal species were reintroducing, helping in terms of the wild population and so on. What is being done to actually grow the numbers again?
Yeah, good habitat management. That's what it is. And it's gonna be a slow process regardless, because they are such slow to reproduce critters, 1 to 2 pups a year. As far as I know, there's no push to reintroduce like captive reared bats or anything like that. I don't know that those would fare very well. But really it's a matter of us getting our arms around what the population's actually doing, which we do a really good job of that with all of the monitoring, and then just having dedicated good habitat management. And the good thing is, like I said, good habitat management for bats is good habitat management for so many other critters too. So if you're working on your property and you are dedicated to really high quality early successional habitat, you're helping out the bats. If you've got really good forest management practices and you've got snags and you've got everything that they need, that's good bat habitat. So again, bats aren't a monolith. Different species need different things, but in general, good habitat is good habitat. So when we have wildlife lovers that understand the importance of good habitat, native plants, all of these things, early successional habitat management, all of that, that's going to help the populations of not just bats, but certainly bats. It's just going to be a slow process, though. It's going to be a slow build, but it is a build at this point. I'm confident to say. Yeah.
So there is hope.
Yeah, there's hope. There's hope. It'll look different. The future is going to look different from the past, certainly, because some species have taken over the niche of other species, and I don't know that the balance is going to look the same as it did pre-white nose.
Right.
But that's okay. That's okay too.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Back to you, Luke.
Thank you, Allison. I always feel like I speak for everybody, but I always learn something new whenever I speak with someone from the Resources Commission side. We really appreciate everything that you're doing and chatting with us today. I know that it goes a long way for people in the crowd that are listening, and we'll make sure to send out an email with follow-up stuff and your contact info.
Yep.
And
there it is.
Oh, there it is. Everybody write it down.
Yeah.
Monty, did you have any closing words or?
Well, other than I think you and your co-presenter did a wonderful job tonight.
Yes.
Yeah, that was Susanna. That's my 2-year-old. The 4 and 6-year-old are busying themselves doing other things, but
I thought you mastered that very well. It was
not
seamless.
our first rodeo. Not our first rodeo. But
no, but it was. This is a subject that obviously so many people are interested in. I know I learned a lot tonight, and I thank you for taking us through it, Allison. And it's good we got your contact information. I think there'll be a lot of people reaching out to you, and let's get those native plant habitats built. Let's go.
That's right. That's right.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Yes. Thank y'all.
Alrighty.